Welcome, traveller. Come, take a seat by the fire. Let the gentle warmth chase away the chill of your long journey. Listen to the crackle of the logs, the soft sigh of embers as they whisper ancient secrets. Here, in this quiet circle of light, we leave the weight of the world at the door. If you find comfort in stories like these, consider joining us on more journeys. Your support helps keep the fire burning bright. Now, sit back, let your mind wander, and simply enjoy. Tonight, as the flames dance and cast their tender glow on old stones, we drift to distant nights under velvet skies, where the moon sailed high and pale across sleeping lands. It is there we meet Selene, luminous goddess of the moon, and Endymion, whose quiet slumber became an endless dream of love. By this humble hearth, we explore their gentle legend, seeking not the clamour of mortals, but the timeless hush that holds tender truths close to its heart. Far above the hushed fields and winding rivers of the mortal world, Selene drove her chariot across the night sky. Her steeds were pale as morning frost, their hooves striking stars into brief, shimmering life before fading into the dark. Draped in flowing silver robes, her hair streaming behind her like a spill of soft light, Selene moved with a grace that made even the quiet heavens hold their breath. Each evening she rose from the edge of the earth, lifting her luminous face to cast gentle radiance over sleeping forests, silent hills, and lonely shepherds who watched in awe. Dew formed wherever her gaze lingered, a delicate offering left on curling leaves and mossy stones. In her passage, the world seemed to exhale, soothed by her soft watchfulness. Mortals looked to her for solace, whispering small prayers into the cool air. Lovers parted under her glow, with promises that her return would find their hearts still true. Children dreamed more sweetly under her tender vigil. Even the beasts of the wild paused in their restless hunts to bask for a moment in her tranquil light. Yet for all the calm she bestowed upon the earth, Selene's own heart was not untouched by longing. Immortal though she was, and crowned with the serene beauty of the moon itself, there stirred within her an ache as old as time. A yearning not for the endless heavens she so faithfully crossed, but for something more fragile and fleeting. She carried this quiet hunger with her each night, trailing behind her like the faintest shadow upon her silver wheel. Little did she know that far below, hidden among gentle hills and olive groves, a mortal would soon draw her gaze. One whose simple slumber would become the cradle of dreams that even a goddess could not resist. Nestled in a tranquil corner of the world, far from the clamorous courts of kings or the dust-choked paths of conquering armies, lay a gentle country of rolling hills and sunlit groves. Here, olive trees twisted their slender arms toward the sky, and wildflowers painted meadows in soft blushes of gold and violet. The air was sweet with herbs that warmed beneath the day's embrace and cooled again under the rising hush of evening. It was in this serene place that Endymion lived, a shepherd by humble birth, content with the rhythm of dawns and dusks that shaped his quiet days. His flock moved like drifting clouds across grassy slopes, their bells a gentle music that needed no lyre to perfect. When he walked among them, staff in hand, the earth itself seemed to welcome his tread, as though recognizing in him a soul uniquely attuned to its slower, patient song. By night, Endymion often lay upon a simple bed of moss, gazing upward at the wheeling constellations. The cool breath of darkness caressed his brow, and sleep would come tenderly, wrapping him in dreams that were bright with nameless wonder. Villagers spoke of how he seemed touched by something beyond the common lot, that the very stars lingered longer over his resting place, as though reluctant to leave. It was during one such still night that Selene first beheld him. Driving her chariot high above mortal concerns, She let her luminous eyes drift across fields and forests until they settled upon this solitary figure, breathing evenly in the cradle of the earth. Something within her faltered, as if the silver reins she held had loosened of their own will. Endymion lay there unknowing, his chest rising and falling with the gentle certainty of one who had never imagined he might be watched by immortals. The moonlight gathered about him, cloaking his peaceful form in a radiance even softer than before, and Selene felt her ancient heart stir with a sweetness that was almost pain. Thus began a silent thread between goddess and man, spun not of grand declarations or fiery conquests, but of long, lingering glances cast down from the heavens, and dreams that would soon grow deep enough to cradle both mortal sighs and immortal yearning. Night after night, Selene rose from the dusky edge of the world to guide her pale horses across the vast arch of sky. Yet ever since her gaze had fallen upon Endymion, her journey seemed altered, no longer the serene, solitary passage it had been for countless ages. Now her chariot's course bent subtly, as though the stars themselves leaned to whisper reminders of the sleeping shepherd nestled among the olive hills below. She found her eyes searching for him almost before the first silver hoof struck its path across the firmament. When at last she spotted his still form, lying curled among wild thyme and clover, a gentle sigh escaped her lips. A breath so soft it scarcely stirred the air, yet it carried a longing deeper than oceans. Selene slowed her bright steeds each time she neared his resting place. The wheels of her chariot seemed to hush their usual gleam, rolling more quietly across the night's high roads, so she might linger undisturbed. Down through drifting veils of moonlight she peered, studying the tranquil rise and fall of Endymion's chest, the way his dark lashes lay against sun-browned cheeks, the tender parting of his lips as dreams moved behind them. Sometimes, caught by an impulse older than memory, she would whisper his name, a sound no mortal ear could catch, but which made the leaves shiver lightly and a small shudder pass through the earth itself. In these moments, even the owls paused in their silent hunting, as though honouring a secret unfolding in their midst. Mortals far from those hills might have marked how the moon appeared brighter on certain nights, casting silver pools that seemed almost warm where they gathered. They could not know it was the goddess herself, pausing in her patient course to drink in the sight of one gentle shepherd, her ancient heart filling with a tender ache. So did Selene's nightly path grow ever more entangled with Endymion's quiet slumber. The vast heavens might stretch on unchanged, but within their silent depths, a new story had begun, woven of soft light, breathless watching, and the first fragile tremors of a love that would soon reach beyond the grasp of either god or man. One evening, driven by a yearning that had grown too bright to be contained by mere watching, Selene descended from her high, star-stitched roads. Leaving her chariot to drift upon a silent current of the heavens, she stepped lightly down a staircase of moonbeams that spilled across the hills, each silver step blooming beneath her feet. She came upon Endymion as he lay asleep in a small hollow lined with sweet herbs. The air around him was rich with the faint perfume of crushed blossoms and the gentle breath of earth cooling after the day's warmth. Moonlight gathered thickly here, pooling over his resting form like a second, more tender skin. Selene knelt beside him, her long fingers hovering just above the curve of his brow. How easily she could have touched him then, could have traced the quiet arc of his cheek, smoothed back the wayward strands of dark hair that curled at his temples. Yet she hesitated, a goddess brought low by the same fragile wonder that might seize any mortal heart when standing too close to a cherished dream. Instead, she let her light embrace him. A subtle glow unfurled from her being, wrapping around Endymion in soft ribbons that sank into his sleep. Beneath that gentle weight, his breath deepened, and a small sigh escaped his parted lips, as if his dreams stirred to meet hers across the unseen threshold that divides mortal from divine. In that moment, time seemed to hold itself utterly still. No nightbird called, no fox rustled in the underbrush. Even the stars above leaned down more closely, crowding the edges of the sky so they might witness this tender convergence of earth and heaven. Selene watched him as one might watch the fragile flutter of a bird's heart beneath pale plumage, filled with a reverence so profound it ached. She did not yet speak her love aloud, for even gods may tremble before words that could change all things. Instead, she rose once more on her slender beams of light, carrying the memory of that nearness with her as she resumed her quiet journey across the sleeping world. And thus, though Endymion slept on, untouched by conscious thought of the goddess beside him, the seeds of their intertwined fates had been sown, delicate yet enduring, destined to blossom beneath countless future moons. As nights unrolled in their gentle procession, Selene found herself returning again and again to the quiet hollow where Endymion lay. Each time, she ventured a little closer, her luminous form weaving tender patterns upon the grass. Though still she dared not wake him outright, her presence began to seep into the fabric of his slumber, like moonlight soaking into dark waters, until even the deepest currents shimmered with its touch. It was there, beneath bowers laced with dew and the distant murmur of resting leaves, that Endymion's dreams grew strangely bright. No longer did he wander alone through vague corridors of sleep. Now he moved through meadows bathed in a silver glow, where delicate flowers opened shyly to spill fragrances sweet enough to stir longing in the very stones. Sometimes he glimpsed a figure among pale trunks, drifting just beyond reach. A woman crowned in soft radiance, her eyes vast with tender sorrow. Though he could not name her, a part of him recognized the hush that always fell when she drew near. In these dreams, Endymion felt a peace so profound it seemed almost to cradle his very soul, soothing away cares he had never thought to question. When he woke at dawn, the memory of it clung to him like a faint perfume, bittersweet and lingering. Selene, for her part, watched these delicate changes unfold with a joy tinged by awe. Each night she wove small blessings into the cool air around him, whispered hymns that rustled through olive branches, beams of softer light that pooled over his resting heart. She was careful, always, to let the mortal rhythms guide her, to let Endymion come to her, not by force of divine will, but by the gentle flowering of his own hidden yearning. Thus did their worlds begin to braid together, not through the bold clash of titans or the fanfare of regal courts, but through quiet exchanges that passed almost unseen by all else. The moon's glow dipped lower over the hills, and a shepherd's dreams turned bright with images he could not name yet somehow trusted with every beat of his simple heart. And so the delicate thread spun on, drawing Selene ever deeper into mortal tenderness and Endymion into a mystery that would one day shape not only his nights, but the course of both their fates beneath countless watchful stars. At last, the tender ache within Selene grew too vast to be held in mere silent watchfulness. One night, when the sky lay soft and dark as velvet, she descended once more upon her delicate beams of light and stood by Endymion's side, with her immortal heart thrumming like a fragile bird in her breast. She gazed down at him, so peaceful in his mortal sleep, his brow untroubled by any shadow of fear or doubt. The gentle rise and fall of his breath seemed to echo some deeper music only she could hear. A promise, perhaps, woven into the fabric of all living things, that love might find them even here, in a world so fleeting. At last, with a breath that trembled through every silver strand of her being, Selene spoke. Her voice was scarcely more than a hush of moonlit wind through leaves, yet it carried with it all the longing she had borne across countless lonely nights. "Endymion," she murmured, and the name seemed to awaken the very air. Sleep softly, beloved of my secret heart. Dream deeper yet, that I might dwell there with you, far from the jealous gaze of time. Though Endymion did not stir, a small smile curved his lips, as if some distant echo of her words had found its way into the tender folds of his dreaming. Around them, the hills seemed to lean closer. The trees bowed under the weight of that quiet confession, and the stars themselves burned a touch more brightly, eager witnesses to this fragile weaving of mortal and divine. In that moment, Selene understood something profound, that true love required not conquest nor splendid vows, but the simple grace of being near, of cherishing without demanding, of offering one's own light to warm another's dark. So she bent low and pressed a kiss, lighter than the brush of moth wings, upon his temple. A soft radiance flowed from her lips into his slumber, sinking through skin and bone to seed itself in the hidden gardens of his soul. There it would bloom slowly, patiently, until at last their hearts might meet fully in a realm untouched by sorrow or the restless march of days. With one lingering look, Selene rose once more into the night, her pale horses gathering to her side. As they carried her away across the arching dome of the heavens, a hush settled over the hills, a tender promise left behind, woven of breath, moonlight, and the first shy bloom of love made real. From that night forward, Endymion's sleep deepened into something almost otherworldly. Each evening, as darkness folded itself over the hills, his eyes would grow heavy with a sweetness he could neither name nor resist, as if some gentle tide within him longed to drift far from the waking world's small concerns. In these dreams, the fields he wandered were more luminous than any mortal sun could render them. Silver blossoms opened at his passing, sighing out delicate fragrances that seemed to speak in a language just beyond hearing. Cool streams ran clear as polished crystal, their surfaces mirroring skies littered with stars brighter and closer than he had ever seen. It was here that he first truly saw her. Selene walked toward him through groves of pale, whispering trees, her hair a cascade of moonlight, her eyes vast pools of tender sorrow and fragile hope. When she reached out a slender hand, Endymion did not recoil. Some hidden certainty bloomed within his breast, telling him this vision had long waited for him, hidden in the soft folds of every night he had ever known. "Who are you?" he asked, though his voice sounded hushed, as though wrapped in velvet. But Selene only smiled, laying cool fingers against his cheek. Her touch sent a gentle shiver through him, a ripple of light that seemed to dance along every nerve. In that touch, names and titles became unimportant. He knew her not by mortal lineage or divine station, but by the simple grace of how her gaze rested upon him, as though he were precious beyond the counting of days. The dream would fade each time with the first breath of dawn. Endymion would awaken among dew-wet grasses, the sun climbing slow and golden through the olive branches overhead. Yet the memory of Selene lingered in his blood like a secret song. Throughout his simple tasks, guiding sheep to fresh pastures, mending worn fences, cupping water from clear springs, he moved with a new softness, a wondering smile ghosting his lips. He could not say why, only that each night sleep called to him more sweetly, and each morning he woke with his heart a little fuller, as though the moon herself had left small silver gifts hidden in its deepest chambers. Night by night, their meetings in that soft, unreal country grew longer, as if time itself had learned to hush its ceaseless pace out of reverence. Endymion would slip into sleep almost eagerly now, his mortal cares folding away like fragile moths before the coming of dusk. Each time his eyes closed, he found himself beneath silver boughs, waiting. And each time, Selene would be there, her luminous form drifting toward him through a hush sweeter than any song. They wandered together along moonlit banks, where pale flowers leaned close to hear their quiet laughter. Sometimes they stood hand in hand beneath arching trees, whose leaves glowed with gentle phosphor, sharing long silences that needed no breaking. When she pressed close, resting her forehead lightly against his, the air seemed to fill with a tender ache that left both of them breathless. No vows were spoken. Their love unfolded wordlessly, a thing as natural and delicate as the slow unfurling of petals at dawn. Yet the bond between them deepened until it gleamed more surely than any crown wrought by divine or mortal hand. But in the hidden folds of Selene's heart, a shadow lingered. She was a goddess, bound to the ceaseless arc of the heavens, her chariot waiting to carry her each night across the wide vault of sky. Endymion was of earth, destined for seasons that bloom and fade, for flesh that must one day fail. Each dawn drew them apart again, his sleeping form soft and warm upon mossy ground, while she was pulled inexorably upward, away from the gentle cradle of his breath. Still, Selene could not deny the joy that swelled within her each time she returned. Nor could Endymion refuse the way his heart lifted in dreams that now bore the scent of moonlight and starlit myrtle. Whatever rules governed gods and men, they seemed to bend for these moments, as if the universe itself paused to watch love move softly across boundaries older than memory. And so, beneath countless wheeling constellations, their devotion grew, a quiet defiance of fate's usual order, spun not of grandeur and thunder, but of small shining stillnesses where one immortal and one mortal met and found themselves forever changed. As countless nights drifted by, Selene's heart grew ever more tangled in tender roots that wound themselves around Endymion's sleeping form. Each parting at dawn became harder to bear. Her hands lingered longer in his dark curls, her lips pressed more urgently to his peaceful brow. Even the moonlight that spilled from her grew softer, suffused with the hushed ache of longing. Yet she could not escape the truth that waited beyond every gentle embrace. Mortal lives moved by rhythms as inevitable as the turning of seasons. Already she sensed how time coiled like a quiet serpent at Endymion's feet, waiting to strike with the slow patience that spares no beating heart. The thought hollowed her, with a grief deeper than any she had known in her ageless passage across the night. In her sorrow and desperation, Selene did what few gods ever dare. She humbled herself in prayer. Beneath a sky crowded with watching stars, she knelt upon the mossy ground where Endymion slept and lifted her luminous eyes to the far reaches of Olympus. "O powers that dwell above and beyond even my pale dominion," she whispered, her voice tremoring like leaves under a gentle wind. "Grant me this, that he might sleep forever, untouched by age or sorrow, so I may love him always as he is now." Her plea stirred the still air. The night seemed to lean closer, listening. Somewhere far off, an owl gave a low call, and the stars shifted minutely in their ancient courses, as if exchanging thoughtful glances. When at last the hush settled back around her, Selene felt a subtle change in the breath of the world. Endymion sighed in his sleep, a sound so sweet and untroubled that tears gathered in the corners of her immortal eyes. Gently, almost fearfully, she brushed her fingers along his cheek, and found it warm still, yet held in a slumber deeper than any mortal rest. She understood then that her wish had been granted. Endymion would dream on, untouched by time's cruel hand. His chest rose and fell with slow, serene breaths, eyes closed to all but the wonders that awaited him in realms of soft shadow and silver bloom. Selene pressed her brow to his once more, both relieved and quietly shattered by what she had wrought. For though he would never fade, neither would he wake to smile at her with waking joy. Their love would live on in tender, stolen moments, each night's visit a bittersweet gift bought at the price of eternal sleep. Thus did Selene make her choice, to hold her beloved forever, even if it meant he would only ever meet her in dreams. And so the fabric of fate was gently, irrevocably altered, all for the sake of a love that refused to yield to the merciless march of mortal days. From that night forward, the world of men rolled on beneath sunlit days and bustling seasons. Yet for Selene, all life seemed to gather in the quiet hollow where Endymion lay. His slumber became an anchor, a gentle centre around Vilkit her immortal existence slowly curled. Each evening, as dusk crept across hills dusted with lavender and thyme, Selene descended anew. Her chariot drifted soundlessly above olive groves bathed in the first tender greys of twilight, the silver reins slipping loose in her relaxed hands. For she no longer raced across the heavens with unbroken stride. Instead, she lingered long above the place where Endymion dreamed, tracing slow, graceful circles that spilled moonlight like cool nectar over his resting form. Here, love was a hush, a delicate breath that stirred no jealousy among gods, nor fear among mortals. Selene would alight upon mossy stones beside him, folding her luminous robes close around her as though to hold in their glow. Sometimes she bent and spoke soft words, meant for his dreaming ear alone. Little confessions of longing, tender musings on how the world seemed both vast and strangely small when measured by the space between two joined hearts. Under her watch, Endymion's face remained forever youthful, untouched by sorrow or the faint lines of care that grow over time like creeping ivy. His lips sometimes curved into a faint smile, as though some distant echo of her presence brushed against the edges of his dreams. When this happened, Selene would close her eyes and draw a deep, quiet breath, holding that fragile joy close as one might cradle a trembling bird. Around them, the night spun on, filled with secret witnesses. Owls perched silent on twisted branches, their gold eyes soft with a knowing too deep for speech. The wind itself seemed to tread carefully through the grove, so as not to disturb the tender peace that had taken root there. And thus their love endured, a meeting place between worlds, woven of pale beams and silent sighs. It held no promise of awakening kisses, no mortal dawn where hands might clasp in shared laughter. Instead, it was a vow whispered endlessly beneath the stars, that Selene would come each night, lay her quiet heart beside Endymion's, and keep watch over a sleep that had become a temple to their timeless devotion. In time, word of Endymion's unending sleep began to ripple outward, carried on soft winds that stirred the silver leaves of countless olive trees. Shepherds passing by the grove would pause, struck by a hush so profound it seemed to settle on their shoulders like a gentle weight. They glimpsed the youth lying peacefully upon his mossy bed, a faint smile upon his lips, and felt a stirring they could not name, a sense of standing upon the edge of some holy mystery. At first, they left small offerings without quite knowing why. A woven crown of meadow flowers here, a handful of ripe figs there, laid quietly among the roots. In the evenings, young women sometimes wandered to the grove's fringe, drawn by tales of a beautiful sleeper watched over by moonlight. They would sit with hands clasped loosely in their laps, faces lifted to the sky, hoping perhaps to feel even a breath of the tender enchantment that lingered there. In hushed gatherings around hearths, old men told stories of how Selene herself came each night to keep vigil. They spoke of seeing a silver glow pooling between the trees, of hearing faint notes like music played upon glass. Some claimed that if one listened closely, they could catch the murmur of a goddess's sigh, so full of longing it would echo inside a mortal chest for days after. Yet for all their curiosity, none dared trespass too deeply. The grove took on a quiet sanctity, a place where human steps slowed and voices softened out of instinctive reverence. Even the wild creatures seemed to sense its fragile spell. Deer would pass through on delicate hooves, pausing to nibble at tender shoots, their dark eyes wide and unafraid. And so the tale of Endymion and Selene wove itself into the hearts of all who lived near. Mothers would hush fretful children by reminding them how even the mighty moon found joy simply in watching over one she loved. Lovers exchanged promises beneath the soft radiance, whispering hopes that their own bonds might endure as gently and as long. Thus did their quiet story grow, not as a grand epic sung by heralds or carved upon the walls of kings, but as a tender legend that threaded through daily life, teaching by its mere presence that there exists a kind of love content to dwell in silence, sustained not by fiery conquest, but by the slow, patient glow of devotion that neither age nor death could wholly dim. As the seasons turned their quiet wheel, the tale of Selene and Endymion settled deeper into mortal hearts, not just as a curiosity or a thing of whispered wonder, but as a subtle guide. For in this story, told in fragments beside evening fires or beneath archways twined with night-blooming vines, people found a tender wisdom that touched the secret places of their own souls. It taught that love need not always shout to prove its depth. In Selene's nightly descent, there was no grand procession, no thunder of chariots that shook the hills, only a soft glow stealing across dark grass, a goddess laying aside all splendor to sit quietly by the one she cherished. Her devotion unfolded in patient visits, in breaths shared with a sleeper who could not answer her touch with waking words, yet who met her still in dreams. In this, many found hope, that love might endure even across impossible distances, even when parted by realms more vast than those between stars. Husbands whose wives lay sick beneath thin blankets took comfort in the thought that tenderness was not measured by laughter alone, but by the silent vigil kept through long nights. Lovers separated by harsh seas, or by the cruel hands of fate, still traced the moon's path across the sky, whispering prayers that perhaps some part of Selene's steadfast heart might lend them strength. The legend also offered a softer truth about longing itself. For though Selene's heart ached with a yearning that would never fully ease, it was not a torment to be despised. Rather, it became a bright thread woven through her immortality, shaping her with a gentle gravity. It showed that even gods could be ennobled by love's tender ache, drawn down from cold heights into a humble grove, where moss cradled the one they held dear. Thus, in small ways, the myth of Selene and Endymion began to shape mortal dreams and choices. Under moonlit eves, people held each other a little closer, spoke promises more softly, but kept them more faithfully. They understood that sometimes the truest devotion was found not in triumphant embraces, but in quiet nights spent simply being near, hearts laid open, patient as the stars. Over the years, as countless moons waxed and waned above quiet hills, the story of Selene and Endymion sank so deeply into the land itself that it seemed the very stones remembered. In spring, when delicate anemones unfurled across sunlit meadows, villagers would say it was Selene brushing her fingers over the earth, coaxing forth blossoms the way she once traced Endymion's gentle brow. When summer nights lay heavy with scent of wild herbs, people paused in their evening labours to watch the moon climb from the horizon, its glow spreading like cool balm across the fields. The olive trees stood still, their slender leaves whispering among themselves as though recalling how many times they had seen the goddess descend, luminous and hushed, to her dreaming shepherd. In autumn, as mists pooled low in the valleys, stories drifted with the falling leaves. Children gathered them like small treasures, repeating tales of the sleeping youth who never aged, and of the goddess whose tender watch wove each night into a quiet hymn. They scattered these stories like seeds, carrying them from hearth to hearth until every family seemed to have their own soft version, embroidered with tiny details born of local hopes and fears. Even winter, when frost gripped the land and breath hung white before each mouth, carried a ghost of the legend. For in that stark stillness, beneath star fields sharp and countless, it was easy to believe that Selene yet traced her ancient path above, her pale gaze sweeping over roof and forest alike, pausing longest where hearts waited up in secret longing for the simple grace of being seen. And so the myth blurred at its edges, becoming part of how people explained the small mysteries of night. Why did the wind sometimes sigh so tenderly through bare branches? Why did dreams on certain moonlit evenings seem more vivid, steeped in silver light? In quiet moments, hands resting idle upon wooden thresholds, many found themselves murmuring that it must be the lingering breath of Selene's love, drifting gentle as snowfall across a world forever touched by her patient vigil. Thus did earth and sky become a living script for their story, written in the rustle of leaves, in the hush of shadowed groves, in the slow, bright climb of the moon itself. And whether spoken aloud or simply felt in the calm throb of blood beneath skin, the tale of Selene and Endymion endured, a tender murmur threaded through all things that sleep beneath the watching stars. As ages slipped by, the tale of Selene and Endymion softened into something beyond mere legend. It became a kind of unspoken understanding, a gentle wisdom carried not in scrolls or etched upon crumbling stone, but in the shared hush that settled over people whenever the moon rose bright and full. On such nights, even those who claimed to put little stock in old stories might find themselves pausing mid-step to gaze upward. There was a subtle pull in that silvery gaze, a reminder that somewhere beyond reach lay tender mysteries older than any mortal lineage. Fields lay bathed in cool light, rooftops glistened with a delicate sheen, and within dim-lit cottages hearts beat a touch slower, tuned to that same patient rhythm Selene had traced across countless skies. It was in these moments that the deeper lesson of their story breathed most clearly. For though Selene's love was tinged with sadness, an ache never fully eased by the sweetness of her nightly vigils, it carried also a profound acceptance. She did not rage against the limits of her world, nor tear the fabric of fate to claim a brighter joy. Instead, she found meaning in simple nearness, in resting her immortal grace beside a sleeping brow and whispering hopes too soft for any waking ear. In this, mortals found a quiet mirror for their own tangled longings. They learned that love's truest power often lay not in grand declarations or fevered pursuits, but in the gentle art of staying, of returning night after night, to lay patient devotion at the feet of another, even knowing the heart might ache, even knowing the future could give no promises. And so the moon came to symbolize more than just passing time or distant beauty. It became a tender sentinel, gliding through darkness to watch over all who dreamed. Whether lovers lay tangled in one another's arms, or widows traced cold linens where another had once slept, the soft spill of Selene's light offered a balm, a small assurance that someone, something, still cared to keep watch. Thus, beneath her pale gaze, humanity learned to treasure not only the bright blaze of joy, but also the quiet glow of loyalty that endures through long shadows. It was a truth whispered without voice, a lesson held in the way the night itself seemed to lean close, cradling all hearts, mortal and divine alike, in a hush as tender and deep as sleep. In the gentle hush of midnight, when even the restless fox curled in its den and streams seemed to pause their silver chatter, the story of Selene and Endymion was no longer merely a tale told by mortal tongues. It had become something subtler, a pulse moving through the veins of the world itself. Breezes that drifted over fields carried faint echoes of their devotion, whispering through stalks of barley and wheat like soft voices sharing secrets. The dew that formed upon petals before dawn held within each trembling drop a fragile memory of moonlight laid tenderly across a sleeping brow. Even the slow sigh of the earth settling in darkness seemed to murmur of the goddess who knelt night after night beside her dreaming beloved. Animals, too, felt the weight of this quiet inheritance. Herds gathered closer under Selene's watchful eye, their breath pluming in soft clouds that mingled with the pale glow descending from above. Birds stilled on hidden perches, fluffing feathers against the chill, not out of fear, but in gentle trust that the night held them safely. All life seemed, in those hours, to drift closer to the same calm understanding, that there was solace in simply being near, in letting one heart rest close to another without demand. Among humans, the story softened grief, sweetened longing, and lent even solitary souls a sense of belonging. Old widowers who sat alone beneath vine-draped eaves found comfort in the thought that love might persist in silence, watching from just beyond mortal sight. Young couples traced Selene's arc across the sky with linked hands, whispering shy hopes that their own tender bonds might last beyond fleeting seasons. And so the myth blurred at its edges, becoming less a clear narrative and more a breath, inhaled in dreams, exhaled in slow smiles and thoughtful pauses. It was stitched into lullabies hummed by mothers with tired eyes, into the way neighbours greeted each other a little more gently under a bright moon, into prayers left unspoken but still heard in the soft chamber of the heart. Thus did Selene and Endymion's love lose none of its power for becoming part of everything. Instead, it grew vast and intimate all at once, woven through root and wind and sighing blood, a quiet testament to how even the simplest vigil, kept faithfully in the dark, could shape the world in ways neither gods nor mortals could fully name. Long after the first villagers laid simple garlands at the grove's edge, and generations rose and fell like gentle tides upon the land, the story of Selene and Endymion continued to drift quietly through mortal hearts. It passed not with the blare of trumpets, nor the heavy stamp of history's marches, but in the faintest rustle of memory, the kind that lives where breath slows before sleep. Children grew up beneath its gentle arc, tracing the path of the moon with small, wondering fingers. They listened wide-eyed to elders who spoke of the goddess who descended each night to watch over the one she loved, and carried these tales with them like small lamps into the winding halls of their own lives. As they aged, many found new ways to keep the story alive. Young couples planted olive trees together, hoping that their roots would tangle deep in the dark earth, just as Selene's devotion wrapped around Endymion's slumber. Artists painted quiet groves lit by soft lunar glow, capturing not grand embraces, but the tender hush that said more than any fervent vow could. Even poets, whose verses often chased bright fires and roaring passions, found themselves returning to this myth for its slower, more enduring flame. There was a lesson nestled at its heart that seemed to bloom differently for each soul. For some, it spoke of patience, the gentle courage it takes to love without urgency, to cherish another's nearness without demanding more than the moment gives. For others, it offered solace, that even separations woven by fate's stern hand might yet be bridged by steadfast affection, returning again and again like the moon itself, tireless in its vigil. And in this way, Selene and Endymion's quiet tale laid down seeds that would sprout in seasons they would never see, in lullabies whispered over cradles, in slow kisses traded under night skies, in the simple way someone might pause at a window, just to let moonlight spill across their hand. The old story unfolded again, subtle as breath, delicate as dew. So did their love press forward through the hush of time, shaping futures as yet unborn, reminding all who paused to listen that the gentlest watch kept in the dark might one day blossom into a light bright enough to guide countless hearts safely home. And so, like the moon's own patient cycle, the story found its way back to where it had always quietly waited, in the tender depths of night itself. For beneath the countless journeys of Selene's pale chariot, beneath the hush of olive groves, and the slow beating of hearts laid close in sleep, lay a truth older than any spoken word. Each time Selene descended from her bright path, brushing aside the tapestry of stars to kneel beside Endymion, it was as though the universe itself paused. Even the winds seemed to draw in their breath, holding it tight within leaf and hollow so that nothing might disturb this soft communion. In that sacred hush, the world was stripped of all clamour and striving, left only with what mattered most, the simple grace of being near. Night after night, ages slipping past like gentle ripples across a dark pond, Selene returned. She laid her hand upon Endymion's brow, let her luminous gaze linger on the gentle curve of his mouth, and felt the tender ache of love swell anew within her. It did not lessen with the passing of centuries. If anything, it grew, deepening into a stillness so profound that it seemed to cradle not just them, but all who ever yearned in silence for another's nearness. And so the night learned to echo with their quiet story. Shadows draped themselves a little more tenderly across slumbering forms. Moonlight stretched its silver fingers down to brush cheeks damp with dreams, as if offering a gentle reminder that somewhere in the vast dark there was a goddess who understood what it meant to love with such soft, tireless devotion. Thus, even when no human voice rose to tell their tale, the myth lived on, whispered in the sigh of branches, mirrored in the calm depths of lakes under starlight, woven into the very breath of the world. It waited patiently for each new soul who might stumble upon it in a moment of quiet, ready to open its luminous heart once more and reveal the tender promise it had always kept hidden in the folds of night. In time, even words seemed too heavy to bear the delicate grace of Selene and Endymion's love. Their story drifted beyond the reach of mortal telling, dissolving into a softer realm where meanings moved like faint ripples through shadow and light. The night itself became their scripture. Each silver thread of moonbeam was a quiet verse, each sighing wind through myrtle or olive a gentle refrain. Pools of dew that gathered before dawn mirrored not just the silent heavens, but the tender way Selene still bent close to press her glow upon Endymion's sleeping form. Sometimes, under skies where stars lay strewn thick as spilled grain, it seemed all creation held its breath, as though afraid that even the smallest sound might fracture the fragile miracle unfolding again and again in the secret cradle of those hills. In that hush, countless hearts, human and otherwise, pulsed a little slower, touched by something so soft and yet so vast it defied any mortal reckoning. For this was not love that blazed with the bright, brief fury of mortal passions. It was a patient, luminous devotion that asked nothing of time except the chance to return. Night after night, age after age, Selene came, not as a conqueror seizing joy, but as a guardian of something precious precisely because it could not be possessed. And so their bond wove itself into eternity. It slipped beneath the skin of the world, settled into the marrow of stone, the silver veins of rivers, the slow dance of tides that felt the moon's pull and rose gladly to meet her touch. Every lullaby hummed under breath, every tender glance exchanged beneath a quiet sky, carried an echo of that ancient vigil. Thus did Selene and Endymion's love pass beyond legend into a living promise, a murmur in the blood of all things that rest beneath the watchful night. It spoke without voice, teaching in silence that the deepest devotions might never shout their names across the world, but instead glow steadily, tenderly, wherever hearts chose to keep faithful watch. And so, folded deep within the gentle layers of night, the story of Selene and Endymion grew into something that was no longer merely theirs alone. It became a tender murmur that reached out to all who lay in darkness with hearts open and vulnerable, to every soul that ever pressed a hand against the cool sill of a window and gazed upward, seeking solace among the quiet stars. For in those moments, when breath slowed, when thought unspooled into softer shapes, the world seemed almost to lean closer, as though wishing to share a secret. And what it offered was simple, yet endlessly profound. That love could dwell not in clamorous victories or splendid triumphs, but in the steadfast return, night after night, to lay one's devotion down like a quiet gift. Even those who never heard the old stories might feel it. A solitary shepherd lying beneath the open sky, his flock clustered close for warmth, might sigh into sleep and carry within him dreams brushed by silver light. A mother keeping vigil at her child's bedside could feel her own breath fall into rhythm with a tenderness older than any cradle song, as if Selene herself passed by to lend a calm hand to fevered brows. In distant cities where stone outlasted memory, lovers still paused in lantern-lit streets to share a hush beneath the full moon. They did not know they echoed an ancient goddess kneeling by her sleeping beloved, yet somehow their hands clasped more gently, their words softened by the same patient wonder. Thus did Selene and Endymion's tale live on, not always as names or faces, but as a quiet inclination of the soul toward devotion that asked nothing but to remain. It slipped into sighs drawn long against the dark, into tears shed for reasons not fully understood, into smiles that rose unbidden at the simple grace of being alive to feel so deeply. And if ever one stood alone beneath the vast wheeling constellations and felt their chests stir with an ache both sweet and aching, it was perhaps because somewhere within, that old story still whispered, "Love returns again and again, gentle as moonlight across the hills. And so may you." At last, as all stories must, this tender weaving of moonlight and dreams finds its gentle close, though not in endings marked by sorrow or by bright final chords. Instead, it settles into a hush so deep it seems to cradle the very pulse of the world. For even now, countless ages since Selene first paused her chariot to gaze down upon a humble shepherd's slumber, the night yet bears traces of their quiet devotion. The moon still glides across dark fields with the same patient grace, silvering rooftops, forest crowns, and sleeping brows alike, as if to remind all who dream beneath her of a love that never sought to conquer, only to remain near. Beneath her calm glow, Endymion's rest continues, timeless and unmarred by grief or the slow wearing of days. His breath rises and falls in that sacred hollow where moss and blossom keep tender vigil, and though no mortal steps may disturb that sanctuary, countless hearts visit it in secret, guided by the soft, unspoken yearning that draws them always back to the gentle promise of night. So does their story live on, not as a tale bound by ink or speech, but as a stillness that holds all things, the rustle of leaves in the dark, the delicate hush of snowfall upon quiet roofs, the faint sigh drawn by one soul, reaching invisibly toward another. And if ever you find yourself awake while the world lies sleeping, your gaze caught by the pale arc of the moon, let this hush wash over you. Let it remind you that somewhere, beyond the cluttered stir of days, there exists a love as constant and tender as the slow turning of the heavens, waiting always to keep gentle watch over the dreams of all who dare to rest their hearts in the quiet fold of night. Thank you for keeping us company by the quiet glow of the fire tonight. As the last embers drift into gentle darkness, may this story of Selene and Endymion linger with you like a soft breath upon your heart, a tender reminder of love's patient watch and the hush that holds all dreaming things. If these humble tales bring you comfort, you are always welcome to return. Here, the night waits with countless more stories folded in its gentle hands, ready to cradle you whenever sleep feels far away. Rest well, dear traveller. May your own dreams wander lightly under the kind silver gaze of the moon, and wake again wrapped in the calm, knowing that somewhere, always, a quiet devotion keeps watch.